Right. Welcome everyone to today's clinical trial webinar. Today, our guest presenter, Borbala Zepes from Gideon Richter, will be sharing details on their phase 2 study, KITE-PWS. This study is currently enrolling patients 17 and up at multiple sites across the US and Europe. We will be collecting questions from the audience throughout the webinar and will answer as many of your questions as possible after the presentation. Without further delay, I give you Ms. Zepes from Gideon Richter to tell you more about their study.
Hi, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Borbala Zepes, and I'm the early phase clinical project team lead over at Gideon Richter. I'm very happy to have you here on today's occasion. And as Susan already mentioned, I'm going to be talking about our phase 2 clinical trial with adults with Prader-Willi syndrome. And the name of the study is KITE-PWS. A few words about who we are over here at Gideon Richter. So we are a Hungary-based Central European company. And we have more than 200 drugs and are present in around 40 countries. So what is the aim of our study, KITE-PWS, in other name RGH-706-003? So our aim is to study our drug, which is called RGH-706, and study its effect on hyperphagia in adults with Prader-Willi syndrome. How do we think our molecule RGH-706 works? So our drug blocks a hormone in the hypothalamus in the central nervous system, and it blocks a receptor called melanin concentrating hormone receptor 1. And why it is relevant? Because it participates in signaling that promotes food-seeking behavior, and there has been a few studies that have shown that in people with PWS, there's probably an imbalance between or within this system. And we believe that our molecule, by blocking this receptor, it might have a positive effect on hyperphagia. And our trial is aiming to help us understand if our molecule RGH-706 indeed is safe and well tolerated and is effective in doing its job by blocking this hormone. So what are our main goals in our study? So our most important primary objective is to understand if our compound is effective in decreasing hyperphagia. To measure this, in our study, we are using the Hyperphagia for Clinical Trials questionnaire, which is a validated hyperphagia questionnaire for clinical trials that we can say is the gold standard in measuring hyperphagia in people with PWS. It is very important to note that HQCT, Hyperphagia for Clinical Trials Questionnaire, is a caregiver-reported outcome. So caregivers and parents who participate in our trial beyond their loved ones are very important, and their commitment and participation is just as significant in our study as that of those of our patients. So we would also be looking at safety, tolerability, and we will also be gathering information about how our study drug enters the bloodstream and what levels it reaches. So in other words, we're also studying the pharmacokinetic properties of our compound. We also have a set of other medical examinations, lab tests, and measurements, DEXA measurements that are similar to standard X-rays. And we would also be exploring the effect of our compound on body weight and the body composition. And we are looking at if a set of different metabolic biomarkers are changing. And we also have not a lot, but just basically 3 other questionnaires in our study asking about the participants' general well-being and also asking if there's any change in caregiver burden. We have So regarding the US and globally, we have 25 sites. We are up and running. And in the United States, we have exactly 6 locations, 3 in the New York City area, 1 in Chicago, 1 in San Diego, and 1 in Cleveland. And it's also worth mentioning that a few of our sites are also accepting families who are flying in from outer states. So this is a quick look and a short graph about how our study looks like. It has 2 parts, part A and part B. I would like to highlight that currently we are enrolling and recruiting people for part A only. So in part A, we would need 60 people with Prader-Willi syndrome. And after we finish this part A, that's when we would be looking at our data and seeing if and how we can move on to part B of our trial, in which we will be seeing 100 patients with Prader-Willi syndrome. As for part A, people who enter the trial will need to take part in the study for 23 weeks. Out of these 23 weeks, 6 weeks are the treatment period with our drug. And if somebody decides to enter our study, they would have to do 6 on-site visits and a set of remote telehealth visits. If we would be all right in part A, and if we could go on to part B, that study part would mean 21 weeks of participating and a 15-week long treatment period. It is also important to highlight that our trial is a placebo-controlled trial. So what that means is that we are randomizing people to placebo or an active arm. I also think it's important to highlight that our compound is a capsule that should be orally taken 1 time a day throughout the participation period. Where we are now, we don't see or we don't have an open label extension to our study, but we are working hard to looking at and extending our non-clinical data to hopefully change this in the future and gain more knowledge to explore this possibility later on. Here is another slide to show you and give you an idea of what kind of procedures we are doing during the study visits. I think a lot of them are quite standard, such as weight measurements, waist circumference measurements, taking vital signs, and answering the questionnaires we have already talked about. And the investigator and the site staff will be asking asking you as the caregiver of a person with Prader-Willi syndrome, and also the person themselves about their symptoms and any changes in their general state. And we would also be asking the investigators' impressions of any changes that might be happening. As I mentioned before, our most important endpoint is hyperphagia for clinical trial questionnaire that should be answered by the primary caregiver of the person with Prader-Willi syndrome. So we would need that one primary caregiver to attend each and every visit with the person with Prader-Willi syndrome. It's also important to highlight that we have a few blood draws in the study for which the patient would need to be fasting. Some general information for you to know about our study is that our participants and their caregivers are compensated for travel expenses out of pocket, and they are also eligible for a stipend. And about the whole picture on this, it's the sites that can give the detailed information. And also, we are paying, of course, for the costs of the study drug tests and procedures. This is another visual that can give you a better understanding of our study visit schedule. As for the time being, you would need to more diligently check are scheduled for part A, you can just see a different breakdown of what I've already mentioned, what we are doing on which visit. So there's an optional sub-study part for people who are entering part A of our trial. There is the option that someone can enter our PK sub-study. Basically, all the study visits and all the procedures are quite similar to the people who enter this study part, with the addition that on 2 specific visits, there are quite extensive blood draws. We need to do this to understand really the pharmacokinetics of our compounds. So we would need to understand how RGH706 enters the bloodstream, what levels it reaches, and really how long it takes to get metabolized. For people who attend this study part, we are also providing travel accommodations and overnight stays, as it might require a longer period to stay at the site. And of course, as we understand that entering this study part means a bigger endeavor and a bit more details to sort out for the families, we are providing an accordingly adjusted stipend for PK sub-study participants. And another very important aspect of our trials, who we are looking for and who we are accepting. So we would need people who have a kind of genetic diagnosis of Prader-Willi syndrome. We are accepting people who are 17 years or above. Regarding body weight, we would need it to be between 88 and 450 pounds. And we would also need the participants to be on a stable body weight before participating in the clinical trial for around 3 months. As I mentioned earlier, we would need to have a consistent primary caregiver who is with the person with Prader-Willi syndrome for 4 waking hours at least every day and 3 months prior to the study, so they can have a very good and deep understanding about the changes in the person and in their hyperphagia. We cannot accept people who have uncontrolled diabetes or have diabetes that requires insulin. There are other set of medical history and other medical criteria in terms of entering, but the investigators and the sites are the best to determine your eligibility for the study. What should be considered before you enroll in KITE-PWS? Of course, there are possible risks and benefits as to with every clinical trial. What I can say about the history of our compound, that it has already been tested in a phase 1 trial in neurotypical individuals who were either lean or obese or overweight, and we experienced a really good safety and tolerability profile, which is of course very encouraging. Regarding the full scope of these aspects to consider, of course, our investigators and site staff are more than happy to help you out. You can find more information and details about our study on clinicaltrials.gov and also on FPWR's website. And where we are currently, so it's important to know that we are up and running in all of our countries globally. That also means the US. We have our FDA approval, we have a central IRB approval and also local IRB approvals in all the places where we have sites up and running. We have already 9 people with PWS who have completed the study, and there are currently 5 of them who are in treatment. So we really need more participants to complete our part A. And by this, I'd like to really end my presentation about our study. I'm very grateful that we could talk about it today, and I really appreciate you considering taking part in this study or talking about to someone who you think it would be relevant for. So I appreciate you being here today. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that quick presentation overviewing the KITE-PWS study. I really appreciated where you shared that 9 individuals have completed this study and 5 are currently undergoing treatment. This study is going to require, is it 170 patients total? Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. Total for as a total, and in part A, we need 60 patients. So we are, yeah, let me count quickly. We have 46, yeah, to go. Yeah.
So for everyone joining us today, you can really see the importance of filling these clinical trials. You know, if we want to have treatments available, the first step is always completing a clinical trial so that we can really show that these treatments are effective. And in this case, we're hoping that this drug will address hyperphagia for our loved ones with PWS. We do have a couple of questions in the queue. For those of you who are on the line, you are welcome to submit your questions through the Q&A panel. As we go into questions, I did want to quickly share my screen to put up the locations of the sites that are available here in the US. As Barbara mentioned, you know, this is an international site or an international trial with sites across the US and Europe. For this presentation, I simply put up the sites that are available here in the US and a QR code. So if you want to go to FPWR's clinical trial directory and see some of the details that we've talked about today, you can scan that QR code and it'll take you right to that page. So a couple of questions in the queue. How long can we expect a given clinic or a clinical visit to last?
So that is a very important thing to consider. So on-site visits usually last around, I would say, 4 hours, so around half a day. For those people who decide, or those families who decide to participate in the PK sub-study, there are 2 on-site visits that might take longer. Those visits would be expected to take a whole day. But for the general participants who are not participating, indeed, I would say 4 hours, so half a day.
Mm-hmm. All right. And you mentioned that some of the study visits do require fasting.
Yeah.
How many of those visits require fasting, and can they be scheduled for the first thing in the morning?
Yes, definitely. All of our study sites and study staff are very aware about the needs of people and families with Prader-Willi syndrome. So they are being considerate about scheduling these visits as soon as possible to accommodate the needs of the families. And specifically, we have 3 study visits that require fasting, our screening, and 2 additional visits on site.
Mm-hmm. And the fasting is simply for the blood draws. So after the blood draws, could a person have their breakfast?
Yeah, that would be fine. Yes.
All right. So, you know, I'm looking at the clinical trial map here that kind of shows where the sites are at here in the US. If I don't have a site close to me, will Gideon Richter pay for flights and hotels so that I can travel to these sites?
Yes, we have sites that also accept out-of-state families, and also we are happy to pay for flights and accommodations that would make it possible for you and your family to participate. There are a few ways you can reach out to these sites. So on our clinicaltrials.gov website, we have an email address that you can feel free to access and contact. That would come into Gideon Richter, and our team would help you to find the right site for you. Or we have the contact information of our site also available on clinicaltrials.gov, so you can also directly approach them. So these are all possibilities. However, it's important to consider that we have quite a few on-site visits. That would mean traveling and allocating extra time for you. So we just want to highlight this to make sure that it would be feasible from your side.
A question came in regards to reimbursement. It says that there was some specific wording that travel expenses will be reimbursed if you qualify. Does that mean if you qualify to participate in the study, or are there certain qualifications a person has to meet in order to have expenses reimbursed?
That's a very good point. So we provide travel accommodations, expenses, and cover costs to everyone who participates. So it's not that we filter people who already entered the study, but we, of course, provide this to everyone who would be found to be eligible to take part in our study.
Of these sites that we have listed, do they all accept out-of-state patients, or only certain sites accepting out-of-state?
So yeah, I would like to highlight our site in San Diego because they are the ones who are very open and looking forward to out-of-state families, both according to their huge experience in trials with PWS and also their capacities, allowing them to take on families beyond their current pool. So I'd suggest, if you are from a state that we don't have a site up and running, for you to contact our site in San Diego.
Well, I will say, as being a San Diego native, it's a great place to visit. And Lynn Bird, who's the lead PI down at that clinical trial site, is excellent. So anyone who is interested in coming out to San Diego, certainly reach out to Dr. Bird. But what if I live on the East Coast? Can I travel from, North Carolina to New York?
Yeah, sure. Exactly in the New York area, we already have 3 sites. So we make sure that we would help you find the right one who can take you on for themselves. We already received feedback that indeed at least 2 of our New York investigators have openly communicated that they are very happy to welcome out-of-state families.
Mm-hmm. That's wonderful. How about we have someone on the line whose daughter is not yet 17, but will be 17 in October. What advice do you have for this person who might be interested in participating, but is not yet able to do so?
Actually, that's really a perfect timing, because really this would allow you, I would definitely encourage you to reach out to one of our sites that you think you would be happy to go to and it would be feasible for you, and they can explain all the details of the study for you. And actually you can already schedule any screening visit and already in advance. So you don't have to worry about your daughter turning 17 only in October. Please feel free. And we also actually encourage you to reach out to one of the sites, discuss any questions you might have. And really, it's perfectly fine to already schedule a visit after that important birthday.
Thank you so much. If there's any last minute questions, please feel free to add them in. I'm happy to take any more. And I'm just gonna, before we close out today, I did want to discuss, all of our clinical trial sites. FPWR does share details on current PWS clinical trials on our website. The URL is provided here, as well as a QR code that will take you directly to that clinical trial directory. You can use this code to, again, visit the KITE-PWS trial or any of the other 4 PWS clinical trials that are actively enrolling participants. Each trial is unique, offering potential treatments for 4 different challenges. Today, we discussed RGH 706, which is looking to address appetite in PWS, specifically hyperphagia. Bright light therapy is another non-drug intervention that's evaluating the use of bright lights to reduce daytime sleepiness. So if your child is between the ages of 6 and 18, you may be interested in this remote study. No travel is required, and you simply need to have excessive daytime sleepiness to participate. Guanfacine is another clinical trial currently ongoing This is an FDA-approved drug that Dr. Deepan Singh is evaluating for treating aggression and self-injurious behavior. This trial is enrolling ages 6 to 35, and it only requires one in-person visit to Brooklyn, New York. Finally, while not yet enrolling, we also have the VNS for PWS clinical trial. This is a trial of a medical device that stimulates the vagus nerve. This study will evaluate the efficacy of the device for reducing behavior outbursts. Participants will be required to visit the study site twice, and the remainder of the study visits will be conducted remotely. So if you have a loved one that is challenged by hyperphagia, daytime sleepiness, aggression, or temper outbursts, I would highly encourage you to learn more about each of these study opportunities. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. The first steps to finding treatments for PWS is truly enrolling these clinical trials, and I greatly appreciate your interest in learning more about these trial opportunities. This webinar has been recorded and will be made available for viewing after the webinar. Please do share this webinar with anyone who may be interested in learning more about PWS clinical trials. Borbala, thank you so much for joining us today. If there are further questions that have not been answered, you are welcome to email me. I can send those requests to Borbala and her team, or again, use this QR code to go visit the trial directory. You will find contact information for each of those trials there. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. Have a great day.
Thank you for the opportunity. Have a great day. Goodbye, everyone.